My name is Francis, and I still remember that Christmas night in Denver, Colorado, as though it were carved into stone. The house smelled of roasted turkey, cinnamon pies, and mulled wine, the kind of holiday spread that was supposed to feel warm and comforting. But in my family, comfort was always rationed, always distributed unequally, always weighted against me. We sat around the long oak dining table, the kind polished for guests, yet reserved only for us, as though appearances mattered more than blood. And stacked high on the sideboard, beneath the glow of golden lights, were the gifts, shiny boxes tied with velvet ribbons, tags carefully marked with names. Everyone was called up, one after another, laughter ringing like silver bells as wrapping paper tore and treasures were revealed. Peter, my older brother, unwrapped a new Rolex, its face catching the firelight with a smug gleam. He grinned, kissed Mom on the cheek, and made some joke about time never running out for him. My sister-in-law, Clara, opened a handbag, the kind only the wealthy in New York flaunt, smooth leather, designer initials stamped like a crown. My cousins cheered and squealed when they got the latest MacBooks and iPhones, electronics gleaming as if my parents had an endless river of money for them. The pile grew smaller, the bows dwindled, and still I waited. A polite smile on my lips, though I already knew what was coming. And then the last box was opened, the last ribbon torn. Everyone's hands were full, their voices thick with gratitude, their eyes alight with greedy joy. And mine? Empty. It was my mother who noticed first, or pretended to notice last. She laughed sharply, the kind of laugh that cuts, lifting her champagne glass with mock innocence. "Oh, Francis, we forgot you," she said, her voice dripping with that tone she reserved for me alone, the tone that reminded me I was always the extra, the mistake, the shadow that never quite measured up. The others joined in, chuckles rolling through the room, some nervous, some cruel, but all of them certain I would shrink under their mockery. They expected tears. They expected me to fold into myself, to swallow the humiliation like I had done countless times before. But this time I was different. I had been waiting for this moment. Instead of faltering, I smiled. Not a weak smile, not the trembling mask of a girl desperate to be loved, but a razor-sharp smile, polished and cold. I reached under the table and pulled out a sleek black folder. With deliberate calm, I placed it on the tablecloth, directly in front of me, where everyone could see. Their laughter quieted, curiosity replacing cruelty, eyes narrowing in confusion. "It's okay," I whispered, my voice steady, clear, cutting through the hush. "I got myself something." Slowly, I opened the folder. The room, once alive with chatter, fell silent. Inside were documents, neatly stacked, sealed with official stamps and signatures. Property deeds with my name on them. Bank statements bearing balances that made their gifts look like scraps tossed to pigeons. Contracts and company papers, proof of the empire I had been building in the shadows while they dismissed me as the family's forgotten daughter. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I could see their faces, their confusion, their disbelief, their envy. Peter leaned forward first, eyes scanning the papers as though he could erase the truth by reading it too quickly. Clara's painted lips parted, but no sound escaped. My mother's smirk faltered, her champagne glass lowering just slightly as her hand trembled. "Properties," I said calmly, my finger tapping the pages. "New York, Chicago, Miami, a hotel in Boston, apartments rented out across America, a holding company registered under my name, and accounts in Europe, just for variety." I paused, savoring the shift in the air, the sudden fragility of their pride. "As of last week, the empire I built is worth $17 million. I didn't need to raise my voice. The aggression in me was quieter, sharper, deadlier. Every word was a blade, slicing into the carefully constructed illusions of superiority they had wrapped themselves in for years. For the first time, they looked at me not as the afterthought, not as the overlooked daughter, but as something else, something dangerous. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the weight of their silence. "You see," I said, allowing a smile to curl across my lips. I never needed your gifts. I never needed your approval. While you were laughing at me, dismissing me, excluding me, I was busy making sure I would never need a single one of you again. Peter scowled, the Rolex on his wrist suddenly looking cheap compared to the portfolio spread before him. Clara tried to recover, her voice weak and shaking. Francis, why didn't you ever say anything? I tilted my head, meeting her gaze with ice in my eyes. Because revenge tastes better when it's served at the right table. Their faces flushed, anger and shame clashing with disbelief. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but for once, no sharp remark came out. She looked smaller, diminished, her confidence shattered under the reality I had just unveiled. For years they had treated me as though I were nothing, forgotten at birthdays, left out of plans, mocked for my ambitions. They gave to everyone else, showered them with praise and gifts, while I was left with scraps and silence. But I had turned their neglect into fuel, their cruelty into fire. And tonight, I let that fire burn through them. I brought this here for a reason. I continued, my voice like steel. Not because I wanted your admiration. God knows I stopped craving that a long time ago.
No.
I wanted you to see what happens when you try to erase me. I wanted you to feel the weight of what you lost the moment you decided I wasn't worth investing in. Revenge pulsed through me, electric and intoxicating. Every stunned expression was payment. Every twitch of their lips, every shift in their bodies was proof that my years of silence, of building, of plotting, had not been wasted. They had given me nothing, not love, not support, not even a token gift at the Christmas table. But in their arrogance, they had forged me into something stronger than their laughter, sharper than their cruelty. And now, they sat across from me, stripped of their illusions, staring at the empire I had built without them. That night was not about celebration.
It was about conquest.
And as I closed the folder, tucking away the proof of my triumph, I knew this was only the beginning. They never asked me how I built it. They never asked me what I went through, what I sacrificed, or how many nights I went hungry while my hands blistered from work. To my family, the idea that Frances, the quiet, plain, forgotten daughter, could build anything of worth was laughable. They were too wrapped up in their own comforts, their own gifts, their own reflections in polished glass to see what was rising from the shadows. But I remember every detail, every scraped dollar, every bitter laugh hurled at me like a stone. My empire began with one house, and I will never forget the venom that fueled me when I bought it. It stood on Lexington Avenue in New York, a crumbling Victorian with sagging floors and windows clouded by dust. The neighbors called it cursed, a money pit. My uncle sneered when he heard I had my eye on it. No man would waste $1 on that ruin, he said, his words heavy with disdain. He never even considered that a woman, I, might see potential where he only saw decay. His laughter stayed with me, bitter and mocking, even as I signed the deed. I bought it anyway. Every cent I had went into that purchase. $42,000. Money scraped from waitressing tips at a diner where I smiled through gritted teeth, from late-night bookkeeping for men who never remembered my name, from selling everything I owned that had even a scrap of value. I didn't buy that house because it was safe. I bought it because it was all I could afford, and because it was something no one could take from me. I moved into that ruin alone. The ceilings leaked so badly that I slept with pots around me to catch the water. The walls stank of mildew. My hands bled from scrubbing filth that seemed baked into the wood itself. At night, the sound of rats clawing inside the walls made me clench my fists, promising myself that I would outlast them, outlast the house, outlast the pity and the ridicule of every voice that had ever told me I would amount to nothing. Revenge carried me through those years. Every nail I hammered, every wall I painted, I did with the image of my family laughing at me etched into my mind. They thought I was too weak, too timid, too female to create anything. I wanted to prove them wrong, but not by telling them, not by begging for their approval. No, I wanted to show them when it was too late, when the weight of my success would crush their arrogance like glass under a boot. 2 years I lived in that house, tearing it apart with my own hands and rebuilding it piece by piece. When my savings ran dry, I worked double shifts. When I wanted to collapse from exhaustion, I reminded myself of Christmases past, where I sat giftless while Peter unwrapped gold watches. Aggression became my fuel, my strength. And when I was finished, that ruin on Lexington stood reborn. Clean lines, new floors, fresh paint, and a dignity that no one could deny. I sold it for $480,000. The day I signed that sale contract, I felt something inside me shift. That profit wasn't just money. It was a weapon, sharp and gleaming. With it, I bought another house. And another. I moved from New York to Chicago, where I bought rundown brownstones and turned them into homes families would fight over. I bought a warehouse in Miami and converted it into luxury lofts, the kind rented by men who would never believe a woman like me had owned the very walls around them. In Boston, I opened a boutique hotel, its marble lobby reflecting every hour I had spent bent over ledgers by candlelight. By the time my family even noticed, I had crossed into millions. My bank account swelled while they still dismissed me as nothing more than Frances, the spare, the plain one, the daughter who was easy to forget at the dinner table. They saw only the shell of me, never realizing I was sharpening my claws, turning myself into something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. But make no mistake, every purchase, every flip, every contract was not just business. It was personal. When I negotiated deals with men who underestimated me, I let them talk over me, let them assume my silence was ignorance. And then, when they had made their mistake, I cut them down with numbers sharper than knives, taking their offers apart piece by piece until they bled money into my hands. I enjoyed it, the way a predator enjoys the chase, the way vengeance fills the lungs like fire. My aggression was not loud. It was not the kind that shouts or breaks plates. No, mine was a cold, methodical aggression, the kind that bides its time, sharpens its edge, and waits for the perfect moment to strike. And with every dollar I earned, with every property I claimed, I built not just wealth but a fortress around me. A fortress made of stone and steel and cash. A fortress that made me untouchable. Still, when I closed my eyes at night, I could hear their voices. My uncle's sneer. My father's dismissal when I once asked for a loan of just $5,000 to start a bakery in Boston. My mother's laughter when she forgot me, when she handed out gifts to everyone but me. Those voices became fuel, each insult a brick in the empire I was building. They thought they had broken me, but all they had done was give me purpose. And yet, the sweetest part was not the money. It was the look on their faces when the truth began to dawn. When they realized the girl they dismissed as unworthy had become a storm they could no longer ignore. I didn't tell them about Lexington or Chicago or Miami. I let them believe I was still the same quiet Frances, still waiting on the scraps of their attention. But I knew what I was becoming. I was no longer the forgotten daughter. I was the reckoning they had brought upon themselves. One house. That's all it took to begin. A ruin no one wanted, a ruin they mocked me for buying. And from it, I built an empire sharp enough to cut every one of them down to size. And I wasn't finished. Not even close. I had invited them to Christmas for a reason. Not because I craved their company or because I longed for the brittle smiles and forced small talk that always filled those evenings. I wanted to see their faces. I wanted to watch the cracks spread across their carefully constructed arrogance when they realized that the daughter they dismissed, the sister they mocked, the niece they ignored, had built an empire larger than any of them could imagine. Revenge is a dish best served cold, and I had prepared this meal for years. When I spread the papers on the table, silence gripped the room like frost. Peter's jaw tightened as he scanned the deeds, his Rolex catching the firelight like a desperate attempt at superiority. His wife, Clara, muttered the word luck under her breath, though she couldn't meet my eyes when she said it. As if fortune had stumbled into my lap rather than being wrestled from blood, sweat, and nights filled with hunger and rage. It wasn't luck. It was vengeance. And my father knew it. He sipped his wine slowly, eyes fixed on the glass as though the answers to shame might be found in the dark red depths. But I remembered. I remembered everything. When I was 20, I stood before him in that same house, my hands trembling but my heart certain. I asked him for a small loan, just $5,000, to open a bakery in Boston. I had recipes, I had plans, I had fire in my eyes. He didn't even let me finish before he cut me down. Women aren't meant for risk, he told me. You'll waste it. You'll fail. Better to stay safe and let your brother handle the money. The words sank into me like shards of glass. 2 weeks later, he handed Peter the exact same amount of money. My brother wanted to start a car business. He had no plan, no discipline, no fire. Within a year, the business had collapsed, leaving debts that my father quietly paid off without so much as a word of rebuke. That was the difference. Peter could fail, and it was excused. I could only fail in theory, and that was enough to bar me from even trying. That night carved something cold into me, something unbreakable. They thought they were protecting me from disappointment, but what they had really done was ignite a hunger for revenge so fierce it would carry me further than their narrow imaginations could reach. Now, as I watched my father's hands tremble around his glass, I felt the weight of those years burning away. He looked so small, so powerless, compared to the empire I had built with no one's help but my own. Rage had turned into fuel, aggression into steel, and now the blade of that steel was at their throats. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, my voice steady, but sharp enough to cut. Remember when you said I couldn't handle money? Now I own more property in America than you'll ever touch. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My father froze, his jaw working as if he wanted to speak, but couldn't summon the courage. My mother shifted uncomfortably, her earlier laughter gone, replaced by a tightness around her mouth that betrayed her fear. Peter slammed his glass down, the sound sharp, like a challenge. You think this makes you better than us? He hissed, his face flushed. You think money makes you powerful? I laughed. Not kindly, not softly, but with the kind of cruelty they had all poured into me over the years. It doesn't make me better. It makes me untouchable. You all left me with nothing, and I turned it into $17 million. Tell me, Peter, what do you have besides a watch you didn't even buy yourself? His face darkened, his hand tightening on the stem of his glass until I thought it might break. Clara placed a hand on his arm, whispering something low, but he shrugged her off. The room was a battlefield now, and every eye was on me. My mother finally spoke, her voice brittle. Francis, there's no need to be cruel. We are family. Family? The words slipped from my mouth like poison. Family is supposed to believe in you, to lift you when you're weak. You all laughed at me, dismissed me, left me behind. When I begged for a chance, you slammed the door in my face. You don't get to call yourselves my family now that I've built something greater than you ever dreamed of. Her lips tightened, but she said nothing. My father shifted in his chair, muttering something about how he had only been trying to protect me. But I didn't let him finish. Protect me? I spat the words like venom.
No.
You wanted to control me. You wanted me to stay small, stay quiet, stay dependent. Because if I succeeded, you'd have to face the truth, that your beliefs were wrong, that your son was weak, that your daughter outgrew you all. The silence after my words was suffocating, heavy with the weight of years of betrayal. I could see it in their eyes, guilt, anger, and, beneath it all, fear. They knew I was right. They knew the empire I held in my hands was proof that they had been wrong about me from the very beginning. But the sweetest part wasn't their guilt. It was their envy. The way their eyes lingered on the numbers in the bank statements, the way their breaths caught when they read the value of the properties. They had thought themselves untouchable, superior, forever above me. Now they sat across from me, drowning in the realization that they were the ones left behind. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch, savoring the taste of their shame. Revenge didn't always need to be loud. Sometimes it was enough to sit across from those who doubted you, those who mocked you, and force them to look at the empire they had tried to prevent. That night was my betrayal turned inside out. They had betrayed me long ago, when they denied me, dismissed me, and erased me from their circle of worth. Tonight, I betrayed them in return, not with lies or deceit, but with truth. Cold, undeniable, devastating truth. And as I looked around the table at their pale faces and trembling hands, I knew this was only the beginning. The reckoning had just begun, and I would make sure they never forgot it. That night didn't end with applause or tears. It ended with silence, the kind of silence that stabs deeper than shouting, that suffocates more than any argument could. No one dared to speak after I closed the folder, after I pushed the papers back into my bag, as though they were nothing but scraps of paper instead of the proof of my triumph. Their eyes followed me, heavy with disbelief and envy, but their voices had died in their throats. For the first time in my life, I was the one in control of the room. I rose from the table without asking permission, without waiting for the empty pleasantries that usually concluded our family dinners. My chair scraped the hardwood floor, the sound harsh and deliberate. I wanted it to ring in their ears, to be the final note of the night, a reminder that I would no longer sit quietly and wait for scraps. My heels clicked across the marble of the entryway, each step an echo of my defiance, until the door closed behind me and the cold Colorado air filled my lungs. The next morning, I boarded my private flight back to New York. While the others slept in their comfortable beds, wrapped in their illusions of superiority, I flew above the clouds, the snow-capped Rockies shrinking beneath me. I sipped champagne, not because I enjoyed it, but because it was the taste of power, the taste of distance from the people who had once tried to keep me small. Below me lay the country they had confined me to, above me stretched the sky I had claimed for myself. As the Manhattan skyline glittered into view, I thought of what came next. I had conquered America, brick by brick, deal by deal, turning neglect into capital and cruelty into fire. But I wasn't done. Expansion into Europe was already in motion. A London office awaited me, contracts signed and sealed. A penthouse overlooking the Thames was nearly mine. Soon, I would stand with one foot in America and the other in Europe, my empire spanning oceans, my reach stretching further than my family could ever have dreamed. Revenge had fueled me. Aggression had carried me. And now hunger drove me forward. Hunger not just for wealth, but for dominance.
I no longer wanted to prove myself to them.
They were irrelevant. What I wanted was to leave them in the ashes of their mediocrity, to grow so vast, so untouchable, that their very names would wither in comparison to mine. They had given me nothing. No support, no faith, not even the dignity of a gift at the Christmas table. They laughed at me, dismissed me, erased me from their plans, their wills, their lists. But in return, I had built a fortune sharp enough to cut them down, heavy enough to crush them under its shadow. And yet, the part that satisfied me most was not the wealth itself. It was the knowledge that they could never escape the truth. Every time they looked at their watches, their handbags, their trinkets, they would remember that I had surpassed them all, that the daughter they left behind had risen higher than they could ever reach. Their laughter had built my empire. Their cruelty had given me wings. The first week back in New York, I called my lawyer and rewrote my will. Not a single member of my family would inherit a dime. Every dollar would go into trusts, into charities I created under my own name, into scholarships for women told they couldn't take risks, couldn't build empires. If my family wanted money, they would have to watch strangers benefit from the fortune they had mocked into existence. I wanted them to feel the sting of exclusion, the same exclusion they had forced on me. I also bought the old Victorian on Lexington Avenue back, the house where it all began.
But I didn't restore it this time.
I left it empty, a silent monument to the ruin they said was worthless, the ruin that birthed an empire. I had the deed framed and hung in my office, a reminder that revenge often begins in rubble. But the greatest act of vengeance was yet to come. I knew my family loved appearances more than anything. The family name, the image of respectability, the illusion of superiority. So I began to dismantle those illusions piece by piece. In Denver, I purchased properties in neighborhoods they frequented, restaurants, boutiques, even the land beneath their friends' businesses. Quietly, Without their knowledge, I made myself the landlord of their lives. I didn't need to tell them right away. The day would come when they realized that every dollar they spent, every lease they signed, every luxury they flaunted led back to me. It wasn't enough for me to be wealthy. I wanted them to depend on me without even knowing it. I wanted the world to spin under my control while they still believed they had power. And when the truth finally broke, when they discovered that even the ground beneath their feet was mine, that would be the sweetest revenge of all. But my aggression wasn't just for them anymore. It had become the core of me. Business deals no longer felt like transactions. They felt like battles, and I relished every victory. Then, twice my age walked into boardrooms assuming they could outmaneuver me. They left stripped, their offers gutted, their pride in pieces. I did not forgive arrogance in strangers any more than I forgave it in my family. Every negotiation was a reminder. I had been underestimated before, and I had turned that underestimation into empire. By spring, my London penthouse was finished, glass walls overlooking the Thames. I stood there one evening, the city glowing beneath me, my reflection in the